The glow of the evening sun cast long shadows across the living room, where tension simmered beneath the surface of what should have been a joyous moment. 3 years of marriage had shaped the rhythm of their lives together, a time of shared adventures and silent agreements about the future they were building. The laughter of their travels, the quiet moments of intimacy after a long day, and the unspoken understanding of not yet had all been woven into the fabric of their marriage. But then one conversation, one revelation pulled at those delicate threads. "I'm pregnant." It had hung in the air between them, thick with both promise and an unexpected weight. He, a man who always believed in shared decisions, in the quiet strength of partnership, his first reaction, a warm smile of surprise, had quickly morphed into confusion. "Wait, how did this happen, weren't we?" That's when her confession spilled out, hesitant at first, like a child explaining away a broken vase. She had stopped taking birth control. Without telling him. Not maliciously, no. It wasn't meant to be a betrayal, but in her heart she had felt ready to become a mother, ready for the next step in their lives. And in her mind, surely he would follow. "I thought you'd be happy once it happened," she said, her eyes searching his for understanding, for acceptance, for excitement that mirrored her own. But all he could feel was the quiet sting of not having been told, not having been asked. He stared at her, the woman he loved more than anything, and tried to form the words that could make sense of what was now spiraling in his mind. He felt disconnected from this new reality, a father to be before he had even had the chance to weigh the gravity of it all. The excitement he knew he should be feeling was drowned out by the sudden realization that this moment had been decided for him. I'm not as excited as you are," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion, trying to be careful with the words. "It feels like this was your decision, not ours. I didn't get a say in something so huge, and now I don't know how to feel." Her face fell, her eyes widening in disbelief, as the warmth in the room seemed to evaporate. "What do you mean you're not excited? It's our baby. We are going to be parents." He swallowed, pushing down the guilt that was beginning to rise. "I'll love the baby, I know that, but—" Her lips trembled as she tried to make sense of his reaction, her hands instinctively wrapping around her still flat belly, protective already of the life growing inside. "So you're mad at me for wanting to have our child, for feeling ready when I thought you would be too." "It's not about being mad," he said, his voice softening, but the frustration still simmering beneath his calm tone. "It's about feeling like I didn't have a choice. You decided to stop taking birth control, and you didn't tell me. That's huge, and I wish we'd talked about it first." The room felt smaller, the air heavier, with the unspoken rift growing between them. She stood there, her face pale and tear-streaked, as if the weight of his words had physically struck her. I did it because I love you, and I thought this would be the next step for us. I never meant to hurt you." He took a deep breath. He loved her deeply, and in that moment seeing her pain cut him deeply too. He wasn't trying to punish her for her choice, but the sudden shift in their lives was too much for him to brush off. "I love you too," he said quietly. "But this is big. This is huge. We should have made the decision together. I don't want to start something as important as this feeling like I was left out." For a moment neither of them spoke. Silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock in the hallway. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and he knew that he had wounded her in a way that might not be easy to heal. "I just thought," she began again, her voice trembling, "that you'd love the idea of having a baby once it was real. I thought it'd make you happy, and now it just feels like I ruined everything." His heart clenched. He hated this, hated that what should have been a happy moment had turned into something tangled with doubt and disappointment. He wanted to be thrilled about becoming a father, and maybe part of him already was. But the weight of the deception, no matter how well intentioned, made it hard to feel anything but confusion. "I'm not saying I don't want this," he finally said, reaching for her hand, though it felt like a tentative bridge across an emotional chasm. I need time to process this, to come to terms with how everything's changed." She nodded, but the hurt remained etched in her face. "I didn't mean to take away your choice. I wanted this so much." He squeezed her hand, but his mind was still spinning. Could he forgive this? Could they move past the breach in trust and rediscover the joy that had once filled their plans for the future? Only time would tell. For now, though, the seed of uncertainty had taken root alongside the tiny life growing inside her, and the path forward was shrouded in a haze neither of them had expected to face. And so, with the tension still thick in the room, the question lingered between them, unspoken but deafening in its presence: was he the asshole? The next few days were a blur of awkward silence and careful avoidance. They went through the motions of daily life work. He caught glimpses of her across the room, her eyes lingering on him longer than usual, as if she was waiting for him to say something to be the first to break the uneasy quiet. But he wasn't ready, not yet. At night they lay in bed, the gulf between them more than just the space beneath the covers. He could hear her soft breathing, the occasional hitch in her breath that hinted at tears. The guilt gnawed at him, but so did the feeling of being robbed of a voice in a moment that should have been shared. One morning, over breakfast, she finally broke the silence. "I miss us," she said quietly, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Her voice was fragile, like it might break under the weight of her own admission. He looked up from his plate, his heart clenching at the vulnerability in her eyes. For a moment he didn't know what to say. The truth was he missed them too, the ease, the laughter, the simple understanding between them. But that was before the news of the pregnancy, before the unspoken betrayal. "I miss us too," he finally replied, setting his fork down. His voice was low, careful, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment of honesty between them. "But things are different now. We can't pretend they aren't." She nodded, her eyes glassy with emotion. I know I made a huge mistake. I should have talked to you, should have listened. I was just so caught up in what I wanted. I thought I was doing something good for us, but I see now how wrong that was." He felt a pang of empathy. He wasn't the only one hurting, she was too. She had been hopeful, excited, ready to move into a new chapter of their lives, only to have that excitement met with disappointment and confusion. But even as he softened, the sting of her actions remained fresh. "I get it," he said, his tone gentler now. "I know you weren't trying to hurt me, but we're supposed to be a team, and this feels like you took that away from me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I know I don't expect you to just get over it. I just hope we can figure this out together somehow." He let her words hang in the air for a moment. Could they figure this out together? Could they rebuild trust and move forward? He wanted to believe they could. After all, they had always been strong together. But there was a part of him that still wasn't sure, that still felt the tremors of doubt shaking the foundation of their relationship. "Where do we even start?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. She bit her lip. "Maybe we start with just talking, really talking. I know I took that from you, your choice, but I don't want to keep doing that. I want us to decide what happens next together." He nodded slowly, the idea appealing to him. "Okay," he agreed, "but I need time. This isn't something I can just flip a switch on and feel better about." "I understand," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet hope. "I just want us to move forward somehow." As they sat there in the soft morning light, the air between them seemed a little less heavy, the tension not completely gone but eased. The silence that followed wasn't as uncomfortable as it had been in recent days. It was as though the first thread of understanding had been stitched between them, a fragile bond that could either be strengthened or torn apart, depending on how they handled the next steps. Weeks passed, and they slowly began to talk more openly. Their conversations weren't easy, there were still moments of hurt, resentment and frustration, but they were at least talking. She made an effort to involve him in every decision regarding the pregnancy. Doctor appointments were scheduled together, and she asked for his input on names, nursery ideas, and all the little things she once would have handled on her own. He appreciated the effort, but there was still that nagging feeling inside him, the voice that reminded him that she had acted alone in the beginning, making a choice that affected both of them without his consent. Sometimes, when they sat together on the couch or during the quiet moments before sleep, and then came the next bombshell. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when she came to him, her face pale, holding a piece of paper in her shaking hands. "I got this from the doctor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something wrong." His heart dropped. "What do you mean, wrong?" he asked, reaching for the paper with a trembling hand. "The baby," she said, her voice cracking. "They're not sure yet, but there's a chance something's wrong with the baby." He scanned the paper, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the medical jargon. Genetic testing, risks, possible complications. His vision blurred as the words sank in, a cold dread washing over him. "I didn't want to tell you like this," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But I didn't know how else to say it. We need to go in for more tests to be sure." He stood frozen, his mind reeling. Suddenly all the arguments, all the resentment seemed so small in the face of this new reality. The life growing inside her, the baby they had struggled to come to terms with, was now facing an uncertain future. For the first time in weeks he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she sobbed against his chest. The weight of everything they had been through suddenly felt insignificant compared to the fear that now gripped both of them. "We'll figure this out," he murmured into her hair, his own tears threatening to spill over. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out." She clung to him, and in that moment they both knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But maybe, just maybe, this crisis would bring them back together in a way they hadn't been before. The baby, the one thing that had driven them apart. And so they faced the uncertain future together, hand in hand, hoping for the best, but preparing for whatever lay ahead. With the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them, they entered the doctor's office the following week, hand in hand. Their fingers were intertwined, a silent promise to face whatever came next together. The sterile smell of the clinic, the low hum of fluorescent lights, and the nervous tension in the waiting room felt suffocating. But in the middle of it all they had each other. The doctor entered, offering them a small, reassuring smile before launching into an explanation of the additional tests. She spoke of possibilities, of percentages and risks, but in the end it all boiled down to a waiting game. More tests, more waiting, more time for the future to become clear. As they left the clinic, walking out into the crisp autumn air, she squeezed his hand a little tighter. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper, eyes downcast. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in what felt like weeks. Not just as the woman who had hurt him, but as his wife, the person he had built a life with, the mother of his child, the woman who, despite her mistakes, was now carrying the weight of the unknown just as heavily as he was. "I'm scared too," he said softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "But we're in this together, no matter what." For the first time in weeks she smiled, small, hesitant, but real. And in that smile he saw a glimmer of hope of the bond they once had. The anger, the betrayal, it was all still there, but it was beginning to fade in the face of something bigger, the life they were about to create together. The following months were a slow, deliberate process of healing. The tests eventually came back clear, and the relief that flooded both of them was overwhelming. They had been bracing for the worst, but the news gave them a renewed sense of gratitude. It wasn't just about the baby anymore. It was about the life they had almost let slip away each other. They attended therapy together, working through the deeper issues that had surfaced from the betrayal. It wasn't easy. Some sessions were filled with anger, some with tears, and others with silence as they learned to navigate the emotional scars that lingered. But through it all, They kept coming back. They chose to fight for what they had. He learned to forgive, not just for her actions, but for the expectations he hadn't voiced. She learned to listen, truly listen, without assuming she knew what he needed. The pregnancy became a shared experience again, as they prepared for the arrival of their. On a quiet night months later, as she sat on the couch, her hand resting on her swollen belly, the distance between them had closed, replaced by a deeper understanding and a stronger bond than they had before. They weren't the same people who had stood in their living room months ago, lost in the shock of a pregnancy they weren't ready for. They were parents now, not just to a child, but to a new version of their relationship, one built on truth, on trust, and on the hard-won knowledge that love isn't just about the easy moments. It's about choosing each other even when it's hard. As they lay in bed that night, she rolled over to face him, her eyes soft and filled with something he hadn't seen in a long timepiece. "I'm really glad we made it through this," she whispered. He smiled, pulling her closer. "Me too." And in that quiet, intimate moment, as the future stretched out before them, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Their story wasn't over, but this chapter, this difficult, complicated, beautiful chapter, had finally found its resolution.